Hey everyone, my name is Devin Townsend and welcome to GuitarMessenger.com. I think guitars are going to make or break songs, right? I'm a firm advocate of the fact that certain guitars have a ton of songs in them and certain guitars have zero in them. And what I mean by that is if a guitar inspires you to play, you're going to write things according to what the attributes of the guitar are, right? So, for example, I got this guitar the other day and I've written a bunch of sort of poppy riffs on it, right? And every time I pick up this guitar, I end up writing those sort of riffs, right? I got another guitar the other day that makes me want to write melodies or sort of bluesy sort of sounds. Or I've got this guitar, this Flying V, that makes me write very heavy things, right? For years, I used a ton of different amps. I used, Mesa Boogie for years. I love their stuff. And I used a 5150, and I used a Buddha, and I used a Marshall, and I used a Crate, and I used, a Gorilla, and a whole ton of like shitty amps, right? But then I bought a pod years back. I thought that was cool. It was cool to have a bunch of like fake sounding, but sort of synthetically cool guitar amps. But then all of a sudden I went in with Fractal, and I used their product, the Axe Effects, and there's nothing else I need. It's as simple as that. I mean, it's like live, I run it direct to the board. Studio, I run it direct to the board. It took me a year to get a sound I was satisfied with. I've just received the Axe Effects 2, and it'll probably take me another year to get to the point where I'm like 100% satisfied with that, but it's the end of the rainbow for me. And in a lot of ways, it's disappointing because I used to like going on Harmony Central and looking up tons of vintage old stupid amps, right? But yeah, I run a rack that's got two wirelesses that I select between with a Radial JX44, which distributes my signal to two Fractal Axe Effects that I can auto switch if one of them goes down, which over the past few years it hasn't. I use a Roland unit, the GP100. I've used that for my whole career, and I run that simultaneously for my effect. I've managed to replicate that in the Fractal, but it's an intangible thing that old Roland has that I really like, and it's kind of part of my heavy sound. For clean sounds, I use the Axe Effects. I use a sort of a basement sound because I like that clean sound with a bit of breakup, and all the effects in the Axe Effects I use for my miles of reverb and delay I use on everything. And that's it. I use an Axe Effects pedal board into it. I use a bunch of Radial gear because they've got amazing quality DIs that, for the most part, are very reliable. And I use a Shure wireless system with a ton of bell packs in case I mess something up. And as Armando, my buddy in tech, will profess, my sweat is disgusting. I've got a viscous sort of oily emission that comes out of my body that basically erodes and destroys anything that it touches, right? It's absolutely revolting, and I'm quite proud of it. So my gear goes through a lot of abuse, and that's the last thing I'd like to say about gear is, for me, the things that are wimpy in my life, either people or my own personality deficiencies, but more specifically gear, the things that can't handle abuse don't last. And by abuse, I don't mean like sadistic, purposeful, I'm going to try and destroy my gear and my friendships abuse. I'm just talking about like if you can't take being on tour, if you can't take getting disgusting sweat all over you, if you can't take a drop off the back of the bus, it's not going to last, right? I've had these very expensive guitars that were beautiful that I had to like handle with kid gloves, and then I just never end up using them because they just don't take the abuse. These guitars take the abuse. Fractal takes the abuse. The things in my life that have been there. I've been in a relationship with a wonderful person for 20 years, and we abuse the shit out of each other just because life's hard, right? And I think that is something that I look for in gear. It's like if you can take being dragged behind a bus and then get there and still work, we're okay. on the Axe Effects, I've got 3 sounds that I use. I use like a high gain, I use a low gain, I use a clean sound. So basically with the heavy sound, what I do is I go, the first thing that goes into is a whammy that has an auto bypass. So, you know, I can, when I do engage it, it just all of a sudden, it's just a pitch up and down an octave, so I can go, wah. And then it goes into a wah, which is an auto engage as well. So when it's cocked back, it's not on, but when it's on, it's like a bad horsey kind of sound. Then I go into a filter block that basically cuts out certain frequencies as you're playing it, you know. And then from there, I go into a drive pedal. I use an 808, and I use it exactly the same way as I did with my rectifiers live. It's no gain, volume cranked, tone in the middle. So essentially, it's a clean boost, right? Then I go into a recto orange, and I just set it up like that. And basically, I would say relatively low gain, you know, maybe 10 o'clock on the gain. The bass is, you know, about noon. The mid is about 10. The treble's about 10 or 11. Presence is maybe about 1. The master is, you know, about 10 or 11, just straight up. And from there I go into 2 cabs. One of them I made. I took the Red Wires patch and I took the Uber Cab 30 and the Uber Cab 75. And I mixed them online on their mixing site. And they're close mic'd with a 57 and a 421. I don't remember exactly. And then in parallel with that, I run a German cab, which is one that came along with the Ultra. And what I do with that is I don't use a microphone on it. So it's just like, and it's not very heavily in the mix. And what that does, it just adds a bunch of boost in the lows. And then past that, I run 2 or 3 parametric EQs, you know, and, you know, I kind of dip the low stuff, anything below like 80. I kind of boost about 3.5. I kind of scoop at about 250, and I add a bunch of like 10 or 11. And then on the global for the Axe, I do the same thing. Actually, on the bottom end on the global, I add a bunch of 60, which for some reason is kind of a cool compromise for the things that I cut. I add about 100. You know, I add even a bit more of the 10. I add a bit more of the 3, and that's it. That's my rig, right? I've got a delay patch that I use. It's like a ping pong that has about 60% repeat. It's a lot of repeat. And that's it, man. That's my heavy sound. For the half sound, I use a Soldano through the same cab situation, but just, you know, almost no gain, no distortion, no delay. And for the clean, I run into a compressor and then into a tweed, and then into a tweed cab, the stock one, and then into another compressor, and then into a parametric EQ that I do approximately the same sort of boosting and cutting I do with the heavy sound, and then into a stereo tape delay that I put a modulation on. I put a low pass filter to get rid of the click of the delay, because with the clean sound I like it to be sort of soupy like an analog sound, and you achieve that by just going into the EQing of the delay and just get rid of a bunch of the high end. And that's it. I think I actually run that delay. I take a feed from that into a reverb, so the reverb's not in line. And it's a ton of reverb that I access with a volume block before the reverb, so I can send to that however much I want during the performance. And then I run that to the output as well, so they're in parallel, but they don't affect each other. And that's my sound, brother. I mean, it's like, I think that there's no smoke and mirrors to it. You just gotta like, for me, because I've been working for so long and I've been in the studio for so long, I know what sounds like shit, right? And I mean, because I've made a bunch of records that sound like shit. So it's like, a lot of times people who haven't had the experience of playing live may get into an Axe Effect or a pod or whatever and think, well, we're just gonna scoop all the mids, you know? And we'll add a bunch of low end, we'll add a bunch of high end, because in my bedroom it sounds great. But the problem with that is when you're playing with a drummer, the high end gets lost in the cymbals, the low end gets lost in the bass, and before you know it, all you've got is this nasally sounding mid-range thing that's messing everything else up. So what I do is I get rid of the bass, I get rid of a lot of the highs, and I make my whole frequency range kind of sit in the middle, because that's where the guitar should sit. And then from there, you can do a bit of scooping and a bit of boosting, right? But your guitar should be a lot more mid-range than people give it credit for.